welcome to Issues in GLB2 Literature. I'm Rachel Hansen, your instructor for this course. Now, the name of our module this week is called Finding Your Footing, Identity, Feminism, and the Self. I'll get the hang of this going live thing eventually. But it always seems like there's some window to close or something else like that. Yeah, not there yet. Anyway, as ever, a little bit of housekeeping just to kind of kick us off. If you were here to just comment on what a woman on the internet looks like, this isn't the place for you. But if you're here to have a conversation about, very specifically this week, just trying to live as your authentic self in a way that is helpful to you and helpful to others, then stick around. I think that you'll find this a really helpful place to be. Now, this is, should I say this now that there's only 4 weeks left with us together in this course? But what we've been doing here now for these past few weeks, and few being, I believe, 12. I usually grab my books to have by me, and I didn't this evening. So there's that. But yeah, over the last 12 weeks or so, we've been doing a guided reading of All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson and Zami, A New Spelling of My Name by Audre Lorde. Both are memoir-style books. That really help us to understand what coming of age can look like at different points in history, and also just to help us identify, getting to know ourselves a little bit better. Now, I found, I guess, kind of just diving right into our readings for this week. In All Boys Aren't Blue. Oh, you know what? This is life in a busy house. There's usually stuff laying around all over the place. I do have All Boys Aren't Blue right here. It was just out of my line of sight. Now, yep. So the name of chapter 12 is The Prom Kings We Never Were. I found this chapter to be ultimately pretty interesting. Not for what George Johnson said, but very specifically for what he didn't say. Kind of here in this latter half of the book, he's starting to talk a lot more about his family responsibilities. And this chapter is no exception. He's talking about his responsibilities to get up early, to get himself ready for school, to get his brother and wake his parents up to start their days. And when he was starting his junior year of high school, the first day of school was September 11th, 2001. Now, those of us who were born in the 1900s, which I think is everyone here in the room right now, and I mean physically and also digitally, we remember that day. But younger folks might not. And I found it to be really telling, that he was going through his routine of the morning, getting ready for school. He's got his, he's in the flow of things. He's a junior in high school and he knows the routine. But starting 11th grade, reading between the lines here, I think it's fair to say that he was a little bit more discombobulated than he wants to let on in his memoir. Now, I might be putting a lot of myself into that assumption. I'll get to that in a minute. But where he really talks about this like disruption in his routine, and his struggle to maybe identify how he can be his authentic self as he is getting ready to go up and out of high school, is this new boy on the bus. Now, he never, in my assessment anyway, just based on what he shared with us, he never really found his footing with this new normal while he was in high school. But I found myself just reading this chapter thinking about my own lived experience during that academic year. And I'd like to imagine that he was feeling just as off kilter as I was in that academic year. Now, I am, of course, a little bit younger than George Johnson. I was in 8th grade in the 2011-2012 academic year. And like him, I was discombobulated socially because it was my first year being back in public school after having been homeschooled for several years. And then also this terrible, terrible event that happened at the very beginning of the school year, that frankly is still coloring our experiences here today, 25 years later. But thinking about that, and then of course I wrote about this in the module as well, this chapter really makes me reflect on the very special sort of grief that can come up when you're thinking about your life as a teenager. Because I know for those of us who are fully grown, you can roll your eyes a little bit. But if really sitting down and thinking about it, being a teenager is pretty rough. And it's rough for you, and then it's also rough for the people around you, right? And trying to figure out who you are, which George Johnson talks about really well, and that I think we can also reflect on if we take that time and that work to be introspective. But then also figuring out not only who you are, but how you show up in the world. And that can really bring along a lot of what ifs with it, kind of like through our entire lives. This is a chapter and some commentary that maybe isn't necessarily like tied up real nicely with a bow or anything like that. But I think it's good to just think about, like, what are some of the what ifs that have stayed with you, throughout your adult life. And just kind of moving on into Zami, a new spelling of my name. We're back here with Audre Lorde, once again finding her footing as a young adult in New York City. Right, so she's back from Mexico, and she's kind of still very much in that phase of life where she's trying to figure out what the deal is, right? Like, who is she and how is she showing up in the world? But a big part of the reason that I think that she is actually finding her footing, even if it's not immediately apparent, is that she starts talking about Jenny in her relationship with Muriel. Now, as we continue to read, we'll see like the relationship with Muriel gets real messy real fast. But Audre, having grown up in this environment where it was not necessarily very safe, to be honest. That move from lying about like, small things, or forgive me, from lying about big things to lying about small things is a pretty significant one. And I bring up lying about small things because she did, with Muriel, lie about her age. Which ultimately I think is pretty bizarre, and it makes me think that there was a serious lack of seasoned adults around them, that everyone in her friend group just accepted that she was 35 when she was in fact 20 years old. If you see a 35-year-old, you can definitely tell they're not 20. There's nothing wrong with that, but anyway, yeah, just a kind of a rambly tangent there. It's definitely fair to assume that there were not many seasoned adults in the friend group if they believed that lie. Now, she also is finding kind of the variety of work, right? Because she's looking for work in a recession, and I think a lot of us know what that looks like. Now, it's work that she hates, but it's work that she hates in a way that's helping her figure out what she actually wants to be when she grows up. Now, like throughout these chapters, we also are learning how dangerous it is, and certainly more dangerous than it is now, to live as a queer person, but also to associate with people who were out as being queer. Now, Audre's friend Ria, who she lived with when she came back to New York from Mexico, eventually leaves for a job in Chicago and cuts ties with Audre. And Audre learns later that it was really for her own safety or for her own security. Now, as I was writing this, I initially was going to say that Ria left for her own professional security, which partially is true. But I also want us to kind of take this opportunity to kind of place ourselves in history at the time. Right, this experience that Audre Lorde is writing about was really not that long, like less than 1 year before the lynching of Emmett Till. And we're still like within the context of this memoir. Of course, Audre does not talk about this in her memoir, which honestly, awesome. I'm glad that that's not something that she felt like she had to talk about. But we're still in this climate, right, in the country, where the lynching of Black folks is something that happens, and it happens a lot. And so there was a very real challenge and danger to physical safety to associate with Black folks, let alone queer Black folks. So not a great decision, right? And I want to be very clear about that. But an understandable one. And I also, one thing that I've been sitting with, and I hope that you will too, is just really wrapping our brains around the idea that now in 2026, being an effective ally really does mean standing up together to challenge the status quo. And that might be in a way that is ultimately kind of dangerous, but is still critically important to changing things to a better way of being. Now, just moving into our journal article here for the week, the Feminist Identity Development Model, which was written in 2009 by Mindy Urkel, Miriam Liss, Catherine Wilson, Lindsay Bateman, Ashley Peterson, and Claire Sanchez. We really get to think about kind of what identity creation looks like, and very specifically feminist identity creation, through that historical lens that we've been talking about here for the last couple of minutes. Now, within this work, they talk initially about really a 5-stage conceptual model to describe how people move towards feminist self-identification. Now, this model of self-identification was first developed as a model of Black identity, and that was developed in 1971, and then was kind of switched, or I don't want to say switched, but was taken and modified by Downing and Roosh in 1985 to help us think about feminist self-identity. So I'm rambling here a little bit, but really all of this to say that this framework is one that is helpful in a variety of different ways to really determine like where you are on a path to a specific sort of self-identity. It doesn't just have to be a racial identity or like an ideological identity. Now, the stages within this framework are passive acceptance, revelation, embeddedness, emanation, synthesis, and then active commitment. Now, really kind of like within these phases, we kind of see people existing like in this continuum, but landing in different points based on where, like kind of what's happening when they're coming of age. Right now, one thing that Urkel and the rest talk about is, in their question, is this relevant for young women today? Is that in second wave feminism, I believe we did a module about that in the fall semester. I will link to it in the video description for this. But if you don't want to read a whole other module, second wave feminism in the 1960s and 1970s, which is where we get a lot of like the visual iconography that we think of when we think of feminism. young women who were born in that time were initially thinking of themselves not really as feminists, right? They're just passively accepting the society that they've been born into, and then realizing that maybe, oh, hey Charles, thanks for joining. But realizing that the world that they were born into is ultimately kind of crummy. And really diving into like feminist ideology, feminist theory, and really like just going full body into the deep end with the sisterhood before maybe realizing that you can't necessarily live that way. And so synthesizing that information, but demonstrating an active commitment to changing the world around them for the better. But what we are seeing now, in the way that that we talk about like self-identity and living authentically, is that the stages sometimes are backwards, where the active commitment is maybe a little bit more performative. That's the word that I was looking for. And then kind of gathering information along the way. And ultimately kind of just ditching passive acceptance altogether. But we really see Johnson and Lorde move through these phases differently in their memoirs. And so I really think that it's important for us to think about those phases, because it's super easy, right, to say, hey, like, you should be yourself. It's so much more than that, right? It's more of a process to live authentically as yourself, when the cultural norms that we live in really challenge that level of authenticity. Now, as we are closing out this week, I do have a couple of things just for you to think about moving into next week, and then a few little, some closeout housekeeping, as it were. I'm really hoping that you can think about how those what ifs from your early life have helped you to live a little bit more authentically now. Now, forgive me, I was really debating if I was going to talk about that a little bit more. It's been a long day today. So yeah, I would just encourage you to think about that. Maybe share some of your thoughts in the chat if you'd like, or in the comments later. That would be great too. And then just a few reminders. Now, both of the books that we have been reading together this semester are ones that I think are really excellent additions to your library. If you do want to purchase them, I would sincerely appreciate it if you could purchase them through the link in my link tree, and that's in the module here. It does mean I get a small commission. And now it is so hard for me to believe, but we really are, of course, we're coming to the end of our time together here this evening, But we're also coming to the end of our time together this semester. I have us down for May 4th as the last written module to go out. And so then our last live session together will be on May 6th. And that is, I mean, honestly, just downright difficult for me to believe, if I'm being totally honest. This semester simultaneously feels like it has taken forever. And like it's gone by really fast. And I really have just appreciated my time here with you. Now, as we are moving forward in time, as linear beings who experience linear time, we are going to be taking just a little bit of a break at the end of this semester. Frankly, I'm tired. I'm guessing that you are too. Right? Like it's just time for a rest. Now, I will be doing a very short summer class that's going to be starting in mid-July. So if you're not subscribed to Gender and Women's Studies here on Substack, I would encourage you to do so, just as you get that notification of what's coming up next. But our summer class is, and the reason it's going to be a short class is because it's really just going to be on one topic, and it's one of my favorites. We'll be spending this summer talking about ecofeminism. So I'm really looking forward to talking with all of you about that after, again, a very, very welcome rest. Now, pulling us back into the more immediate time, I am looking forward very much to being with you again in your inboxes, as ever looking at my calendar, on April 13th. And then here live again at this same time on April 15th. So I will see you in just a few days, and I hope that you have a great evening. Bye-bye.